Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Got to tell you, it's an unbelievable honor for me tonight to introduce you all again to former Premier David Peterson, who is the Premier of Ontario. I was very proud to, at one point in time, be his youth chairman during his leadership campaign, and I believe it was 1981. And
Brian, I wouldn't have had the job that hadn't been for you. You got in there with your energy, your enthusiasm, your brains, and you just made it all happen. And it was one of the happy times of my life working with you. And when we won that thing, and then it sort of went on to we had some good times.
We had some great times. I should tell you about some of the. I should tell everyone about some of the times I had canvassing you in. I think it was the 1980 provincial election where I went door to door with you in London, and people all over London knew you well, and would come out of their apartment doors and give you hugs. And sometimes it was old girlfriends, but I won't go there. And it was a lot of fun to get to know you.
That was you, not me.
It was a great time. But I understand just this past weekend, you had a celebration of your 80th birthday. I know the birthday was in December, but you had a big celebration of your birthday. And so that's why I wanted to reach out to you and find out a little bit about how you're doing, and maybe review a little bit about your career. And, maybe you can talk about where you think Ontario is going and Canada's going. So tell us, sir, how does it feel to be 80?
Well, about the same as it felt when I was 79. I am, I guess it's a milestone for some. I'm not one of those guys that spends a lot of time looking back, Brian. I'm sort of always looking forward. People have come to me and said, "Why don't you write a book?" And I say, that takes a lot of retrospective stuff. I'd rather concentrate my energy on what's going forward. But but the reality is, I've been very blessed, and I have enormous amount of gratitude in my heart. I've been given opportunities in my life to try to make a difference. It's not for me to judge whether I've made a difference or not, but others will do that. But and I've had so many wonderful experiences and so many different levels, from politics to the Pan Ams to the University of Toronto to I've been on over 30 public boards of directors, a lot of philanthropy, hospitals, universities, theaters. And and I'm in good health, and my wife hasn't thrown me out, and I consider myself very blessed. And the kids are all doing well. So I look back only with gratitude, with no other emotion. Have I done everything right? No. Do I have any regrets? No. I think regret is the most useless of all human emotions. So just keep moving forward.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about your career. So you started out in business, I understand, and you were quite successful in that area in the London, Ontario area before you got involved in politics. Is that correct?
Well, I am a lawyer by training. I went to Western, then I went to law school. Then I came back to London, and my father's a consummate salesman, talked me into coming into the family business. So I took over the business, and we bought him out. And then I spent years doing that. And my father was a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant man. He was born on the prairies. I'm backing your question up. He was born in Saskatchewan, absolute abject poverty, 13 kids. Some died 13. Of infant disease on a farm. These were Norwegian peasants. They didn't have enough to eat. My dad left home when he was 13, had no particular education, but he was actually one of the most brilliant men I've ever met in my life. And his best friend was the president of the university because he was so well-read, self-educated, and he didn't want his kids to have the deprivations that he had had. He came to London, started a business, and was quite successful, but he got tired of taking the risks that it requires when you're in business and owning it yourself. So he talked me into taking over, and I did. And then after that, got into politics. So that's a short history of where I.
And you first ran in the 1970s, I believe, and you ran for leader twice, and you won on your second attempt. Is that correct?
And 19, that is correct. Well, 1975, I ran, and I was elected. And you will recall, Bill Davis was kind of on the ropes then, although he never really got on the ropes. Bob Nixon was who you're related to, right?
Bob Nixon is my second cousin, sir. Yes.
And so you have royal blood in you, Brian. And he was supposed to win. It didn't turn out that way. And the Liberal Party was didn't do as well as expected. So Bob quit after that election in 1975. Now I was elected, and we didn't make an urban breakthrough. Weren't have any seats in Toronto to speak of, except Margaret Campbell, but we won 3 seats in London, Ontario, and so I ended up in a member of Parliament, and I was, I think, 31 or 32 years old, recently married, and then things started to happen. You know, I walked out of the first caucus meeting when Nixon retired, and a reporter came up to me and said, "Are you going to run for leader?" And I said, "Well, how can I run for leader? I don't even know where the washroom is in Queen's Park." And anyway, just things compound themselves and go very quickly in politics. And I ended up running for leader, very short after. I didn't know, I learned a lot. I learned a great deal. It was a real exercise in fast education, but I didn't win. I lost to Stuart Smith, you'll recall.
I do. Yeah.
But because I had run, I was, you know, he gives you some prominence. I ended up as the finance critic, which is the senior critic's job in opposition. Stuart took 2 elections, didn't win, and then he retired, and then I ran again, and that's when you and I got involved, and that was in 1982. I'd been hanging around there doing my thing, and I ran against, you'll recall the name, Sheila Copps, and I won the leadership, and then we say, okay, now you're leader, what have you got? And it was a bankrupt party with not a lot of prospects. And we then started the donkey work of building a political movement with the policy, the people, the organization, the programs, and all of the things we needed to do to present ourselves in the election of 1985.
And in 85, it was actually the Conservatives that held on, but you entered into an accord with the NDP. Is that correct?
What happened was there's 125 seats in the legislature. The Conservatives had 52. We had 48. It was absolutely unheard of that we were going to have that many seats. All the momentum was with us, and the NDP had 25. And so, and I was running against Frank Miller. You recall that Davis had quit. So we had the core. So we came second. We had the higher popular vote. We had a higher popular than the Conservatives, and we were really coming on fast at the end. So Miller came into the House, approached the House, lost a vote in the House, and the governor the lieutenant governor came to us and said, "Can we form the government?" And we did, with the accord with the NDP, and they agreed to support us for 2 years. They did not want an election under any circumstance because all the momentum was with us, and we had agreed to do a certain number of things. Excuse me. Policies that we'd run on. So we had a very aggressive program that we ran on, was supportive of the NDP, and we went ahead and implemented that. And I think observers of Queen's Park would say it was probably the most productive legislative time in the history of Queen's Park. People like Steve Paikin say those things, and he's a close observer.
And I was honored to help you out on that campaign. And my second cousin became your treasurer, I understand.
He did, and he was the deputy leader and the treasurer and a trusted friend and advocate. Your cousin Nixon is an institution in this province, and he's still kicking. He's in an old age home in Paris, but writing a blog and a comment on the nature of the world, and honest to God, it's some of the most trenchant commentary you could ever imagine. So, and he's 95. So, Brian, you're going to keep going like that when you're 95.
I hope so. Let me tell you, I go visit him every once in a while, and he's a wonderful gentleman. We've got to take a break, though, for some messages. So we're going to take that break and be back in just 2 minutes and hear more from former Premier David Peterson. Stay with us, everybody. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's an incredible honor for me tonight to be interviewing the former Premier of Ontario, David Peterson. He's a gentleman that I have an incredible amount of respect for. You ran a business. You were a member of provincial parliament. You were a leader of the party. You were Premier of Ontario. And then you became very involved in business law and charitable organizations and public boards. So you've really had a very wide experience. Maybe we come back to politics and your political career for just a couple of minutes. And maybe you could comment on, the Accord. Stephen Harper had big opposition to the idea of a coalition after there was an accord between Michael Ignatieff and Stéphane Dion and the NDP federally. Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, has had this supply and confidence agreement with the NDP federally now. Is there something wrong with having an accord or some sort of agreement with another party, or is it a smart thing to do in your mind?
I think it's a smart thing to do, but it depends on the circumstances. It's not smart all of the time. You can go in and say, take over government with, maybe 2 or 3, if you're close, 2 or 3 other people from a different party, as opposed to a big piece of the legislature. This was appropriate to the circumstances when we had roughly a tie between the Conservatives, us, and the NDP, with having half that number of votes. Now, to the best of my knowledge, Brian, this had never been done in parliamentary history before. There's examples of that now, and you pointed them out with the federal Liberals and others as well, and they did it in BC with 2 or 3 Green Party members, right? But we were different than other ones. We wrote down specifically what our deal was. The NDP wanted to do a lot of things. I said, I'll do this, but I'm not prepared to do that because those ideas you have are crazy, which they were. But we believe in this, and we will do this. And it was a very progressive agenda. We were on the progressive side of the question. And I realized that the NDP did not want to have election because everybody thought if we'd had another election quickly, which I was prepared to have, we would have probably won because we had all the momentum at that point. But that balance of power held this whole thing together for a period of time. It worked, I think, in the circumstances extremely well. They don't always work well. It was not a coalition. Now, a coalition is where you share executive power. You put the other party in the cabinet with you. I was not prepared to do that, and the NDP mentioned it at the time, and I said, "There's no way. There's not a chance I'm going to share executive power. We'll share power in the legislature because you're duly elected to that, but I bear the responsibility for everything that goes on." So. But it was an interesting approach to a peculiar set of circumstances, and I think worked well.
What were some of the biggest issues you had? I think I remember Meech Lake as being one of the.
Oh God, there were a lot of we. It was such an active period of reform. I mean, we just came in first thing. I mean, small stuff, but symbolic. Brought television in the legislature. That was just the first. Then we brought in freedom of information. There'd never been any freedom of information. This place had been run, I used to say, by a bunch of, conservatives out of the Albany Club smoking cigars by white Anglo-Saxon males. We turned its power back to the people. We ended extra billing and took the biggest doctor strike in the history of Ontario. We brought in reform and funding for schools and funded Catholic schools hadn't been in for it. I mean, we ended up doing that and bringing that in, and it would just goes on. We reformed the court system. We brought in things to build for productivity and created centers of excellence, putting all our universities together. We even small things. You know, during that period, Brian, we invented the blue box. We were the first government in the world to do the blue box. It was invented here under our watch, and now it's a method of trash separation that's used around the world. And small things, but they added up to a lot of big things.
What was it like dealing with the leader of the NDP, Bob Rae?
Bob's a very bright guy, and he had his own agenda, and he wasn't, and his agenda wasn't my agenda. His agenda was survival, and my agenda was to provide as good a government as we possibly can. But it was cordial. We didn't spend a lot of time together. We had intermediaries uh, when we had to do something, but I tried to be very respectful of him. You know, when we went to, for example, to China, you know, to meet the president of China, we were building new links to China. It was very hot then. It's a different story now. But and we created a technology center in China. I took him with me, and I tried to treat him with the respect he deserved.
Prime Minister at the time, I think, was Brian Mulroney. Tell me about your interaction with him.
Well, I had known Brian beforehand. I knew him when we were both single young men around town. And I knew him when he was in Montreal. Brian is one of the most charming people I know. I'm very, very fond of Brian Mulroney. I didn't always get along on every issue with him. I didn't see the world the same way. I knew his strengths, I think, and his liabilities. But even when I was mad at him, I liked him because he is so charming. We both gave a lot of blood on the Meech Lake issue. It was, in many ways, the most important thing I was engaged in, and it failed, right? And I had lots of critics, lots of people thought I spent a disproportionate amount of my time on national unity issues. But I had a view, the following view. I've read my history of Canada. I love this country. It is the most decentralized federation on earth, outside of perhaps Switzerland.
Really, that's interesting. You think it's the most decentralized federation on earth?
Yeah, it is. Fact. You could argue Switzerland's a little more decentralized. We're far more decentralized than the United States, for example. And the second point is it's the only country in the world where one piece, i.e. Ontario, represents roughly 40% of everything, GDP, the economic output, and where we're so important. And that's the Premier of Ontario. And I had models in my life, like John Robarts, who I adored and respected. I had to play a role in keeping this country together. We couldn't be just another whining province like some of the other ones who were smaller. And when you're the biggest and richest guy on the block, you got to take your punishment and let people criticize you. But I believe very strongly in the axis between Ottawa, Quebec City, and Toronto. And you'll recall that I was a very good friend of Robert Bourassa. We worked very hard to try to make this country whole in the wake of the patriation of the Constitution by Pierre Trudeau. It was a wonderful piece of work, but it wasn't a complete piece of work. I'm not going to get into the details. I actually lecture in constitutional law, and I won't bore you, but let me just say, we were working on these things to try to complete the patriation and bring Quebec into the Federation. And you're seeing a signatory on the Constitution, which they are not to this day. And you're seeing some of the results of that today and the tugs in this country between Quebec and Alberta and other things that are going on. This is not an easy country to manage. but Ontario has to play a strong role. We're blessed. We're the richest. When you're the biggest and strongest and richest, you have an obligation to others, in my opinion. And sometimes you have to let other people, criticize you. But so I thought we had an important role to play, and we tried to play it.
And then you left politics. What'd you do next?
Well, I lost the election for anyway, whatever it is. It was my fault. It's nobody else's fault. You don't blame others. You say, here's the secret of politics, Brian. When you win, everybody else did it. When you lose, you did it, right? So I lost. And then I actually didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea, hadn't planned on doing this. I went and I taught at university for 6 months, and I had the most wonderful, just to decompress. And I got engaged with students. It's wonderfully exhilarating and uplifting with all these energy from these young people. And I lectured a lot. Then offers started to come in, and I was from law firms. So I went to a law firm. I went to a law firm called Castles Brock that offered me a job, and I was very happy to do it. Then a number of things came in, businesses, and Ted Rogers asked me on the board of Rogers, and a variety of other companies. I've been on a bunch. And then people always, how can you help? So I got involved with the University of Toronto. I was on the board of governors, and I was asked to be the chancellor of the university. So I spent time doing that. Then the premier came and said, well, would you run to go after a bid for the Pan American Games? So I spent a year going after that bid. I'd end up on planes. I'd fly to South America. I wouldn't sleep in a hotel. Sleep on the plane, go to a meeting in South America with people made this thing, turn around, get on a plane, come back without being in a bed in 3 days. Because I was working very, very hard in those days with the law and everything else I was doing, and corporation. And so we won the bid. Then I wanted out of that, but then the next premier came and said, well, please come back and run the thing, because there were some issues. So I came back and took it over and had to make a bunch of changes in the management. And it turned out to be arguably the most successful games of all time. And we came in $38 million under budget. So anyway, when people ask you to do things, you do things. And it's not as if it isn't fun, Brian. I get you don't get paid for this. It's all volunteered. All you get is criticism, but it's fun. And life isn't fun if you're not involved.
When you look back, what's your proudest accomplishment, sir?
My kids. I have 3 kids and 7 grandchildren. My kids are all very accomplished. No credit to me. They're doing their own thing, not my thing. One's in Toronto, one's in New York, and one's in Nairobi. They're all appear to be very happily married. And the most important thing to me is they're all wonderful parents. Wonderful parents. So we have an awful lot of joy with our grandchildren and our kids. And at the end of the day, there's no question that's the most important thing in my life.
Wonderful. I don't know if you know this, but I had the privilege of interviewing your nephew, who ran for politics, and he's a very impressive young man himself.
Which one?
This would be Harry's son.
Oh, Evan Sambasivam. Oh, he's a beautiful kid. I love this kid. He took on a very tough riding, and he learned a lot. He worked like a donkey, and he really learned a lot about politics. He's now working in Ottawa. Oh, he's a kid to watch.
Well, we did an interview where he talked through a bunch of policies, and he was a very knowledgeable young man.
Yeah, he is. He's a great kid. Good for you.
That was
You're finding these kids and bringing them along, Brad, just like you.
It was a real pleasure of mine to. Sorry, go ahead.
Finding you and bringing you along.
Well, I don't know if you remember how we connected. It was actually your mother-in-law that introduced us, because I was at University of Western Ontario Business School, and I think it was Tom Hawken that was one of my professors, and his campaign manager was your mother-in-law. And he introduced me to her, and she said, you shouldn't be talking to the professor. Given your politics, you should be speaking to somebody else. And she was the one that connected me up with your
And
campaign.
that's right. And see, that's the other dirty little secret in our family. Shelley's father had been the president of the Conservative Party of Canada. And her mother worked on a bunch of campaigns for the Conservatives. I actually went to a Conservative convention just after I married Shelley and worked for her father, who was running for president. He was defeated by Michael Meehan. That's a little piece of obscure Canadian history. It wasn't conservative, but it was family, right? Because family is important in politics, as you know. And then Joyce, when Shelley and I got married, and she became a liberal, was very, very active with us, as was her sister, Shelley's sister, Deb, who went on to a very distinguished political career as Minister of Health and Deputy Premier with Kathleen Wynne.
Lots of involvement and lots of success. So it's something that you undoubtedly are extremely proud of. What about your work with U of T? Tell me about that.
Well, I was invited to go on the board of University of Toronto. I'm a graduate of University of Toronto. And then David Naylor was the president, asked me to be the chancellor, which is, what's a chancellor? Like the university is a three-headed monster. It's run by the president, who's important. Chairman of the board is important, and the chancellor is kind of like the king. You don't have any real power, but you get robes to wear, and you actually officially confer the degrees. I was 6 years chancellor. I presided over 181 convocations. And there's something like over 80 or 90,000 kids I gave degrees to. So you get involved in their lives. I was at most of the official events on the university. I was continuing to be on the board. And you're a mentor to and close to the president. As I said, David Naylor, who I got to know very well, don't forget that includes then Arundel, the University of Mississauga, as well as Scarborough, is arguably the most brilliant man I've ever met in my entire life. And the University of Toronto is, by all independent measures, one of the best universities in the world. In the world. Probably the 17th best university. That's comparing it to Harvard, to Caltech, to Oxford, to Cambridge. And to keep those standards, particularly when these big U.S. universities have 10 times the endowment per student that the University of Toronto does. So I got involved in all aspects of the university, including the fundraising. We're involved in a campaign now, Brian, and I'm involved in this, to raise $4 billion.
$4 billion.
$4 billion. It's the biggest campaign in Canadian history. But that is to keep out in the front of the really important technical areas and social areas as well. But things like artificial intelligence and things like graphic design and all. It is the intellectual forefront of this country. And if we don't have great universities and brilliant minds, we're not going to have the great businesses following all that. So this is something that's worked very well for Ken. I was deeply grateful to be involved in all this and all these stratospherically smart people doing interesting things and hopefully making Canada a better place. You cannot build a society in the modern world. You cannot build a civil society or a decent standard of living without high intellectual value added. And a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it comes from your universities, and you have to support them.
One of the issues that's come up at times is are the universities tied in enough with the business community and the community around them, or are they standalone unto themselves? What do you think?
Well, the answer is yes and no. I mean, it can always be better, but they are not agents of the corporate sector. The corporate sector's got their own interests. Look, corporations, their motive is to make money, right? And that's what they get paid to do, make money, and they're judged by pretty harsh standards. Universities have different standards. They're not just there to make money. They're there to produce leadership, intellectual leadership, provide the intellectual capital for leadership, not just in science-based industries, but all kinds of industries. So yes, it needs a very good relationship and a working relationship to provide the kind of brains industry needs, but it also needs independent thinking of people that can stand up and say, society's going the wrong direction here. We are in a very, very, very fraught time in this country and in the world. And we need, it's easy to be a pessimist these days. I'm not, but I had lunch with David Petraeus last week. He was chief of staff and for the U.S. and ran the campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. He said he has never ever seen the world, and he's been active since the Second World War. Never seen the world in such a fraught, tenuous, and difficult set of positions, whether it's with China or the Middle East or Ukraine or the rise of right-wing populism in the States, and here to some extent. The absence of, the decline of media, the decline of anybody agreeing on what the truth is, the hatred that's palpable when you turn around. This takes people that can find our common humanity, and this takes people that can articulate the things that put us together, not the things that divide us.
Well, I think that's a real concern. There's absolutely no question about it. But maybe that's what we can turn to after we take another message break and ask you, what kind of leaders do we need to address these issues today? We're going to take a 2-minute break for some messages and be back with David Peterson, former Premier of Ontario, and maybe talk about some of the challenges we've got in this world today and what ideas David's got to address them. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. David Peterson, the former Premier of Ontario, a gentleman that I had the privilege of getting close to when we campaigned door to door in a provincial campaign in 1980, and then I had the honor of being his youth chair for his leadership campaign in 1981 and 1982 when he was victorious, and I was very proud to do a small part in being part of that team to helping him to be victorious. And then you may not remember, but I ended up being president of a riding association and campaign manager for one of your candidates in subsequent elections. So it was a lot of fun.
Got a glorious career from the time you were a young man, Brian.
I had a lot of fun with it, sir. So you were just addressing some of the challenges that we've got worldwide, and not only do we have a war in Eastern Europe, obviously, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and a war in the Middle East that seems to be expanding every single time I turn my TV on, and threats in China. It was interesting. I read a report where people, one of the big think tanks in the United States said that there were 3 wars going on right now, Ukraine, Gaza, and the war in the United States between 2 parts of itself, and called for a new type of leadership that would bring people together, which is sort of what you're talking about. What do you think we need to do right now with this incredible strife that we're in?
Brian, if I was so smart, I'd still be there trying to solve these problems. But let me start with this point. It could start in everybody's heart. And you start this way. Just because you believe something does not make it true. If you have a view, it's your point of view. It's not necessarily the truth. The truth has been sacrificed in all of these public debates with Trump and everything else. Trump is going to be criticized for many, many things in history. He's destroying our institutions, the FBI, the CIA, our courts. But more importantly, he destroys the truth. He makes up things. You're not entitled to make up things. And just because you believe it does not make it true. Just because you believe in the Easter Bunny does not make the Easter Bunny true. So that takes some intellectual humility to say, I believe this, it's my point of view, but other people are entitled to their point of view. And so becomes the beginning of civilized dialogue. You don't own all the truth, I don't own all the truth, but together we can approximate it better. And for some reason, there's the social analysts are at all this. It's something to do with social media, something to do with the decline of conventional media, something to do with the rise of cable news. When I was in public life, there was, a bunch of newspapers and there, and a bunch of networks, and they more or less had the same, should we say, news. Now, if you make up your own news and you can go and get on a television show or get on a blog or get on social media and make up your own truths and look at the falsehoods that are coming across the airwaves, look at the dark web and look at the junk that intelligent people believe. It is horrible how you can peddle lies, and I don't like using that word, but peddle just basic untruths and people will gather around you. This is the new world of social media, but it is a hard world. So how do you provide leadership? How do you find common ground? How do I get rid of the crazies? There are crazy people in this world, really crazy people. And some of those are on the right and some of those are on the left. We have to gather up the reasonable people in the middle and say, we can find solutions to some of these kinds of problems. And it requires this respectful dialogue and understanding. And that's not a very satisfactory answer, Brian, but just look at the junk that comes across through Donald Trump. It offends any reasonable person. It just offends your intellect. It offends your sense of morality. And if he doesn't, he makes up things.
But it's not just him. There are right-wing populists in lots of different countries, and they all seem to be following similar strategies, aren't they not?
You're right. And there are left-wing populists too. They're crazy people on both sides of the spectrum. So we should eschew the crazies.
We always had crazy people. It's just they got a far bigger megaphone today than they may have had in the past.
Bigger megaphone. There's probably more crazies, and that's what social media has done. The decline of conventional media. Conventional media used to curate the news, and they aspired to tell the truth. A lot of news today does not aspire to the truth. They just aspire to get attention. It's a very, very, very big issue. I don't have the capacity to reach across this except to say thoughtful people that think about things, read all different points of view, and are respectful of others can come to a consensus a hell of a lot easier than the crazies.
So in Meech Lake, you may not have been victorious, but you worked closely with Brian Mulroney and, as you say, Robert Bourassa. If you were advising President Joe Biden or Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on this topic in regards to the sort of partisanship and the polarization that we've got, what would you tell them to do?
Look, it's tough. You just get beaten up. Look at Justin is not particularly popular. He just gets pounded by everybody. I get it, but very effective leader of the opposition. And everything's oversimplified, as does Joe Biden. You know, Trump has taken off the gloves. He just comes at him day and night with personal things. There's no restraint today. In the old days, there used to be a restraint. When I was a politician, you couldn't call another person a liar. You'd get called in the house for that. That's just common today. And so when the people are watching this, what do they think? I think you have to, the answer to your question, I don't know, Brian. This is the $64,000 question, but be honorable, be well-centered, be decent, be prepared to absorb the blows that come with all this, but don't put decency aside as you try to find common purpose.
If these three wars and sort of the social media polarization, et cetera, is the big issue internationally, domestically, the big issue is affordability, particularly housing affordability. What do you think about what our governments are currently doing in that regard, and what do you think we need to do?
If I was so smart, I'd be there, Brian. I don't ask me how to solve the current problems. I'm not current in all of this. Housing, affordability. Look, I've got kids. I know what it's like, trying to buy a house or put down roots. It's terrible. And there's so many issues involved. Basically, it's a supply issue. And they're going at it 1,000 different ways, from immigrants and students and everything else, and not letting foreigners buy houses. And but it's a function of interest rates and supply and municipal supply. And then, and you got to do that in open and transparent ways. And you can't do that by favoring your buddies. And you lose faith of people. So the whole problem in Ontario has been set back enormously by the sense that certain people are profiting from this issue, and if certain friends of the government. And if that is the case, you lose public support. Keeping public support is a very tenuous business.
We got to take a break for some messages, and we'll be back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes with former Premier of Ontario, David Peterson, who just recently celebrated his 80th birthday, and it's a real honor to chat with him. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm just really tickled to share this 45 minutes with David Peterson, the former Premier of Ontario, and a man that I have incredible respect for. And we've talked about his career. We've talked about politics. We've talked about some of the big issues of the day. But David, I got to ask you, you and your wife, Shelley, seem to have had just such an incredibly positive, long marriage. What's the secret, sir?
Huh. I don't know. What do I know? I got lucky. Brian, I met Shelley. She was on the stage. I saw her, took her out for lunch, fell in love, and married her 2.5 months later. And we got married, and I just celebrated 50 years and our 50th anniversary. And I have a few thoughts, but we believe the same thing. We believe in kids. We believe in the institution of marriage. We believe in working things out if they're, and we haven't had we've had virtually no problems that are serious. Oh, but everybody gets mad occasionally. She gets mad at me occasionally. But the secret, talk a lot. Just talk a lot. We talk about every damn thing, even trivial things and important things. And she gives me advice, and I give her advice. And she's very much her own person. She's a very accomplished author, actress, she runs a horse farm. She's a very accomplished human being. She has her own confidence. She's not dependent on me to do stuff. But we have an awful lot of fun together. And the other thing, as I get older, I think just have fun. And I look at my own kids, and they just have fun with their kids. And you don't need to spend money to have fun. You can just go roast a hot dog in the park. Just go for a walk. Just make fun in life. And I'll tell you, those are kind of the crazy glue, the memories that bind people together over the course of a life.
David Peterson, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you tonight. And I got to tell you, you're one of those individuals that I have the utmost respect for. I thought you were a great Premier of Ontario. You were a great individual to learn politics from when you ran for leader. And you've been a real help to me in my career in a couple of different times where you were kind enough to give me recommendations and
you are a very
introductions.
accomplished young man, so I'm very happy to do that, Brian.
I wish I was that young man, but thank you. I appreciate that. That's our show for tonight. We've had the privilege of chatting with the former Premier of Ontario, David Peterson, on the anniversary of his 80th birthday, and it sounds like on the anniversary of your 50th wedding anniversary. Yeah. So that's a great privilege.
Two biggies.
Two biggies. And I look forward to chatting with you again, sir. That's our show for tonight. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from London, Ontario, or downtown Toronto at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos are available on my website, briancrombie.com. I post my podcasts on all those podcast servers that are around, and all my videos are on social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Premier Peterson, it's been a real pleasure and an honor, sir.
You're a media star. Nice to be with you, Brian.